This is Gensh with Infernal's development log number 7. Now, what I talked about in the last log was considering the Yozis as archetypal stories. Now, what exactly does that mean? That means that, as I've said, the Yozis themselves could be considered the stories as a whole, and also the authors or the tellers of the stories. The third circle would be the main aspects of the stories, from the protagonists to the main locations. And the second circle is which descends from them, is their supporting cast, while the innumerable first circle demons are pretty much irrelevant background noise. Well, they're not background noise, of course. Without the minor elements of a story, it would fall apart. It wouldn't seem realistic. But you understand what I mean. Now, one thing that we do know is that the primordials are unable to kill one another, with the exception of the king. Now, what does this mean when we consider that they are stories just as much as they are living entities? Well, what is a dead story? A dead story is one that no one truly tells anymore. Perhaps a dead story is one that's been lost to history, or one whose morals have simply fallen out of fashion. But we do know that the primordials did not think that of one another. They all, to some degree or another, respected one another. And the only one who could do one of them in was the king, who we could perhaps treat as some sort of editor-in-chief. He could, of course, completely axe whatever the story was before it, got anywhere. But out of respect for his peers, he never exercised that privilege. Now, what happened with the Primordial War, though? The primordials, which were not supposed to die, were not capable of dying, died quite a bit. We have, at least 6 confirmed Neverborn. Lots of people like to say 13. That's a good number, but we don't really have any solid evidence for it. So even with just 6 dead Titans, there wasn't supposed to be 1 dead Titan. What happened? Well, that's Autothon's fault. From the beginning, his narrative was one of weakness, and the primordials, for one reason or another, had death. They invented death. It wasn't supposed to be for them, but Autothon's story of weakness progressed. It spread like the disease it is, and it infected them. That's, of course, you recall that they did not like Autothon, that they tried to keep him away, and that they had a tendency to destroy his things. Now, ask yourself, what is it that plague doctors did back in the Middle Ages? That's right, they quarantined people and set their shit on fire. That's exactly what happened. They were trying to quarantine him, and it obviously didn't work. His disease didn't get out through the typical vectors. It got out by finding its place in lesser entities. The bubonic plague, of course, was transferred, or the reason why it spread so greatly was because of rats. Rats that people didn't notice were spreading, and didn't notice were carriers of the disease. Well, perhaps they did later, but, by then it was too late. The same thing happened to the primordials. Autothon gave humans the power of death. But Autothon's narrative is one of weakness, and while weakness in the natural world that the primordials created leads to death. But where did death come from to begin with? We know that the primordial king was capable of inflicting death on his peers, but that's an editorial, since death was only part of his narrative insofar as kings have the right of execution. Where did death come from, though? Who originated the story of death? Was it Metagaus with his story of consumption? That's not strictly necessary, considering that... there have been weird stories. Athena was born of Zeus's head after he swallowed her pregnant mother. So, Metagaus was not the architect of death. Who then? Who invented death? Well, among the primordials, who is associated with the natural cycles. Who's most associated with life? It's Gaia. Gaia is most likely the architect of death, wittingly or unwittingly. Now, this holds some interesting implications for the Neverborn. You see, Gaia may be the architect of death, and if she is, that's a great thing, because in nature, death is temporary. Okay, sure, things die, and, if Grandma dies, you will never see Grandma again, except in Exalted, where reincarnation is the thing, but she won't really be Grandma. All of her memories will be gone, and effectively, humans only exist socially anyway, so even though you can find Grandma's soul again, that's not Grandma, that's someone else. So, but that's just it though, life goes on. Things die, new things arise from them. But the Neverborn are dead, their corpses are just lying around and rotting, and they're... what should I call it? Oversouls? They're main beings that aren't... they're souls that... What are the Oversouls anyway? Truly. Whatever they are, in any case, they're screaming in eternal agony, and they are not being reborn. Which is strange. Now consider the one Neverborn whose identity we do positively know. He who holds in thrall was originally Marduk, who holds in thrall. What's the difference? There isn't one, not really. People don't remember his name, they don't echo his name like they're supposed to in his legend. But he still holds in thrall. He's still impossibly massive, and he really hasn't lost any power. He's the closest thing to a ruler that the Neverborn have. So, aside from his own agony, what's the difference between the living Marduk and the dead Marduk? What does Death Essence do anyway? There's no real clear answer. But perhaps then, if the Neverborn could simply forget that they were eternal archetypal stories, they could be reborn into something else. Because that's the way of death, after all. And if there's hope for the Neverborn, who were completely irredeemably killed, then what does that mean for the Yozis, who weren't killed, but were simply maimed? Well, it's simple. Their stories have been altered by the Exalted into more pliable forms and more easily caged-in forms. They've been abridged. So, in that case, really altering the Yozis isn't nearly as difficult as one should expect. In fact, I would say that would be the core arc of the Inferno's play experience. You can, of course, go the typical route, you're the chosen of hell, you can go about rampaging in creation and do whatever, but the Solars themselves are the heritors of creation. They can choose to do whatever, they have that right. The Abyssals are, well, they're the heritors of the underworld, which is the dark legacy of creation, and they're free to do what they wish in the underworld, and they're free to destroy what they wish on creation, sending it to the underworld, in a manner of speaking. So what then are the Infernos, who are the heritors of the prison in which the Solars stashed their ancient enemies? Well, they're free to do whatever they want in there, and they're going to do it by telling stories. The Solars forged their own legends in creation. The Infernals will then forge their own legends in hell. Or perhaps it's better to say that, since hell already has such strongly defined legends, they're going to append their own legends to these archetypal tales. They will take the shape of these archetypal tales, as do, the majority of stories. You can't really escape the influence of the great works. Even the classics really drew from long-standing traditions of storytelling. You're drawing directly from these traditions. You are not forced to become the Yozis. The Yozis are an example. You can learn from that example. You can learn to do the opposite of what that example did. Or anything you want, really. Hell is your world. You are not simply a rock star. Or perhaps you are, but you know, you can write your own music. You're not forced to play anyone else's. You might start out as a shitty cover band. You know, you play nothing but your favorite Metallica songs or whatever. But then that's it. You come up with your own music. You can always go back and play tribute concerts to Queen or whoever you want. But you are now your own band. You write your own music. You have your own shows. You have your own fans. It's about you now. It's not about who you drew influence from or what happened to them after they burned out. As with all things infernal, it's all about you.